Thanks, guys. Welcome first to Indianomics. The most important event for India really happened on November 8th. I don't refer to the Trump victory. For us, the more important event was the demonetization. It's 40 days now, and what that day went out of legal tender was close to 15.5 trillion rupees. That is 86% of the currency in circulation for a country which uses 98% cash in terms of volume of transaction and probably over 80% when it comes to value of transactions. Now, after 40 days, what is the count looking like? We're going to ask someone who's a very keen and close watcher of India and several other economies. Yes, Gita Gopinath, Professor of Economics at Harvard University, is with us. Incidentally, very closely associated with India. She's the economic advisor to the state of Kerala as well. Gita, thank you very much for joining us. Well, first up, at the end of 40 days, what we have is that of the 15.5 trillion rupees notes in value, about 12.5 to 13 trillion has come back. Does it look like an exercise in futility if it was intended to catch black money?
I mean, I am in favor of the principle of moving to a low cash usage economy. I think the harder thing to swallow is this rather dramatic overnight, making 86% of the currency in circulation in legal tender. Now, the argument was that, well, this was one way to get the hoarders, because they would have a harder time recycling that money, but clearly that's not been the case. I mean, people are fairly imaginative, and they found very creative ways of bringing the money back in. So I'd say ex post, we've seen, it does feel like ex post, we're seeing a lot of the costs without any of the benefits of doing this in a shock and awe manner.
Okay. Now, well, this had to be done in a shock and awe manner. Obviously, it couldn't have been leaked. Are you amazed at the level of corruption, both among those who have the tax evaders and even some members of the banking system? I mean, the opinion from outside was that probably a large part of the tax authorities are not very uncorrupt, are corrupt, and therefore the Prime Minister chose to attack through the banking system. But that's not looking very good either.
Yes, I mean, I don't know whether I can say that I'm very surprised, maybe a little, but it's hard to say if I'm very surprised. I mean, to come back to your point about whether this had to be shock and awe, I mean, that I'm less sympathetic to, because I think there were ways of putting this in gradually. I mean, all of the money would have come back into the banking system the exact same way, but it would have been far less disruptive.
Okay. No, would it have, it was about 8 lakh crore or 8 trillion rupees of 500 rupee notes. Reserve Bank data told us that, not data really, sources told us that 30% of that was not coming back to the banking system, so they thought that was hoarded cash. And of the 1,000 rupee notes, which in value was about 6.2 trillion as of March, maybe 6.5 trillion as of September, 60% of that was not coming back, so probably hoarded cash. Would it have been wiser to only stick to 1,000 rupee? Maybe it would have had a better chance of success and less disruption?
Oh, I do think that having started out with only the 1,000 rupee notes, if it had to be done, in this particular, whatever, surgical strike way, I mean, starting with 1,000 rupee notes would have been the right thing. I think in getting rid of 500 rupee notes and introducing a 2,000 rupee note that is much harder to transact with clearly wasn't the best of strategies.
So what led to its bumbling along probably was the currency printing in lack of capacity, you think? Where would you put your finger in terms of its poor execution?
Well, I mean, I don't think this was a surprise that it takes long to print currency. When you take 86% of the currency out of circulation, it would take you a while, 8 months to a year to print that whole thing. And so if you decide not to wait that long and go faster, then you are going to be stuck with very little. I mean, the expectation that people will very quickly switch to cashless ways of transacting, maybe there was a bit too much of over-optimism about that. And secondly, there was over-optimism of how much money would stay out and truly be kind of burnt cash, which it hasn't been the case.
Well, what's your estimate of the short-term hiccup, and how short is the short term?
I mean, I don't want to put a number on it right now. It's very hard because a lot of this is happening in the informal economy, and our estimates of the informal economy are at best guesstimates. So it's hard to say. We don't measure it very well. I mean, I don't have a number to give you, but there is a lot of the indicators that are pointing towards, a reduction in demand in the economy, and a 1 percentage point decline would not be surprising in GDP.
As you said, if you're taking out 85% of the economy, it's reasonable to assume that it'll take 6 to 8 months to print that much amount of cash. So are we looking at another quarter of crunch in demand?
It seems like that. It doesn't seem like the cash crunch will end anytime soon. It's going to take a while. I think the hope is that people would have moved to non-cash forms of payment, but that, might be a bit overambitious and expecting a little too much. So I think the cash crunch will stay for a little while longer, for sure.
Okay. Well, the Reserve Bank's estimate was about 15 basis points of shaving off of the GDP. Is that an estimation you would agree with at all?
Oh, I find it hard. I suspect there are pretty large standard errors around those estimates. So, no, I mean, that might be an upper end in terms of optimism.
What's the international view? Does this give the rupee a knock? I mean, we had ambitions because of the stability of the rupee that eventually it will be a little more internationally acceptable. I mean, we launched masala bonds after all, rupee-denominated bonds globally. Is all that process going to get a knock?
Yeah. The initial reaction, I think, internationally was that, it's a good thing that India is trying to move towards a cashless economy. It's a good thing that they're trying to catch tax evaders. But the whole execution and the fact that there was not enough cash printed in advance has basically kind of brought into a lot of question about, okay, who's running the show here? What's the policy? How well was this thought out of? The current narrative is now that it's all not so much about tax evasion and black money, but it's about going towards a digital cashless economy. That could have been accomplished far less costly, in a far less costly manner, without having done the demonetization, but doing all the set of, incentive mechanisms that the government is trying to put in place now. So I think while the initial reaction was that, this is certainly a pretty bold move, I think the execution and the implementation is putting pause on appreciating what's going on here.
All right, that was some conversation on the demonetization.